It is 5:31 Eastern Standard Time, and it's June 2nd, 2020. Welcome to the Roosevelt Island Operations Advisory Committee. Chair Michael Shinozaki for the committee. We have Mr. Kraut, Mr. Pallavi. Also from the board, we have Paul, we have Jeffrey Escobar, and people seem to have dropped off.
David Capel.
David Capel,
yes. Representing the corporation, we have the lovely Miss Rosenthal and John O'Reilly, Joanna Graff, Sheldon Haynes, Gretchen Robinson, and that's it. That's all showing up on my screen.
I think you got it.
Okay, I think that's everybody on my screen. Anyway, I'm seeing on my screen. So before we get into the agenda, I have a question that we'll address during the agenda from the public. So I'll read the question and hopefully we'll address it during the meeting. From Rick O'Connor of the Roosevelt Islander blog. First question, when will residents have access to the currently closed McManus and Firefighters Field? Community members understand that it is closed for organized sports activity. Well, what is the reason for closing the field to recreational use maintained if they maintain social distance protocols? Cornell's permitting use, it can be kept open. Domino Park at Williamsburg painted circles 6 feet apart to maintain social distance protocols. Will RIOC do something similar? That's the first question. Is there any comment on whether or not when we will open up the field, maybe for just folks to run around, kick a ball around, as long as they keep apart?
I'm happy to respond. We have been following the governor's directives, and we're in constant communication with New York State Parks Department to the extent that they have closed their permitted fields, and under the New York pause, all permitted fields were to be closed. That's what we did. We kept our parks open, which the governor authorized. And we also have 2 unpermitted fields that have been open, Pony and Capabianca. The Parks Department has kept, I think, 1 or 2 fields open, and it was primarily because of the size of those fields as well as the difficulty in actually closing them. It was just more difficult to close. As I'm sure you guys know, starting on Monday, New York City will be leaving New York pause, and we will be starting New York forward. And we will be following the instructions of the governor in terms of the opening those fields. I don't know exactly when, but I'm assuming it's going to be 2 weeks after that when we go into phase 2. But I will be happy to keep the community apprised of the plans. And, I frankly, we've gotten support from the community, which I appreciate in terms of the amount of open spaces that are now available, and a lot of cooperation. So I think we're in the home stretch when it comes to starting to open up everything.
Okay, thank you. The second question, what is the plan for Roosevelt Island tram usage? Currently 13 passenger limit. Over the weekend, there were many more than 13 in the tram cabins. This is a difficult question because it is public transportation. There are no limitations on the subways. We've tried to limit it to 13 because of the nature of the size of each cabin, and the fact that they come frequently enough that if you have to wait for the next cabin, it's not that bad. We're going to keep it at 13. Again, some people may have to wait, but as we again enter the next phase, there will be more people, I assume, who will be ceasing their work remotely and going back into the city and commuting. So we are going to have to reevaluate that, and I'm sure we will change that. But right now, we're going to stay where it is. Okay, thank you. There's a total of 6 questions. Third question,
will RIOC do anything to help Roosevelt Island restaurants? Will RIOC allow restaurants to have outdoor seating in public spaces such as Good Shepherd Plaza, Blackwell Plaza, temporary outdoor seating around the perimeter of McManus and Firefighters Field, for example? What is the Roosevelt Island version of New York Open Streets plan?
Well, none of the restaurants have reached out to us yet, but we have started a dialogue with Hudson Related. And John, you had a recent conversation with David Kramer regarding this, so why don't you share what you discussed?
Yeah, so I talked with David on Friday. I reached out to him because he reached out to us, and I reached back out to him. We talked on Friday, and he has a resource within his organization that understands the logistics of outdoor dining and how this type of stuff works. So he's going to bring her over to do it. Him, David Kramer, myself, and her are going to do a walk through the island to see if we can come up with some space and understand the logistics and how the food will move to and from the restaurants. Hopefully we can have that done within the next week or so, and then we'll hopefully have a plan. As far as permitting and the cost of permitting, we basically punted that to a later time to discuss how that would roll through. I got to do some research on what we permitted before and understand all the dynamics behind that. So hopefully we can have a plan within the next week or so relative to outdoor dining and space available.
Michael, can I jump in on that for a second?
Sure.
Has there been any consideration given to the idea of letting these restaurants put tables out on the street, on the sidewalk?
We really, David, we haven't cut off any option. What we really want to do is do a sidewalk of the island to see if we can come up with a plan that makes sense. Once we understand what spaces are available, what's not, what could work, what may not work, I can bring it to the executive team and we can discuss how we want to move forward with the plan. But we haven't eliminated any option at this point. We really want to do the site view first.
A reminder, if I may, that a bar down in Southtown ran a summer operation on the pier successfully, although they didn't make enough money to continue it. So that's a place. And also, Trellis, Nisi has always had outdoor tables in the summer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we've talked about both Nisi space, whether it's large enough, and we also did talk about that space down by the pier. We just need to understand logistically how the food gets moved. For example, if the Japanese restaurant wants to move food down to that place and take advantage of it, or it has to split it with the pizza restaurant, logistically, can they get the food down there reasonably fast enough so that we're not serving cold food? So it's a spot we've talked about. And we've talked about Nisi's space and whether that's large enough or can we expand it in any way.
The Roosevelt Island Sushi Pizza Pier.
Yeah.
If I can expand on it a little bit, there's also, I think, an issue for dry goods merchants. I know that I'm involved in this conversation in another jurisdiction, quite actually heavily involved in it, where we're entertaining significant public discretion over the use of public property in order to facilitate commerce by these merchants. Aside from the fact that, in addition to the fact that the state's probably going to put occupancy restrictions on interior occupancy, I think that there's a public fear of going inside small stores, particularly if they're crowded. So the opportunity to do, frankly, the model for this is the farmers market. It's the most really one of the most successful commercial operations on the island. That's how I think a lot of merchants are going to want to do business, at least through the warm weather months. So, to the extent that we can allow merchants to put merchandise out on the sidewalk for display, I support anything that would help these merchants survive because they're under major threat.
The challenge that we faced when we did this in the past, some of the issues for the board to think about as we get into the season. One is that we had challenges through Community Board 8 because when they tried to expand the restaurant spaces farther out into that central garden area and also down to the pier, what impacts that would have on their alcohol licenses and whether they needed, there was some, Rich knows, there's something called a cabaret or something, I forgot what it's called. Special.
You can't dance.
Now, there was a special license that they have for outdoor cafes versus them having their restaurant license. They had to if they wanted to serve when we had the bar and grill there, they had to put up an actual physical barrier.
Yeah, fence it in. Yeah.
Where they can serve alcohol, where they can't, because they couldn't they wanted to put a table out in the park just to get more space, but they couldn't because it was in an open space and you can't serve alcohol in open space.
Yeah, they license what they call it's a licensed premise, so it has to be a specifically defined physical area that's covered by the license, and they want you to enclose it.
Let's not find reasons not to do it.
That's the point.
I believe that the New York on
guarantee
pause relaxed some of those liquor laws for various reasons because restaurants couldn't serve, and it was just another way to help them make some money and also to pay their employees. I don't know if those laws are going to be more restrictive once we move into the New York forward phase, but I will check into that for you and I can let you know.
Thank you.
I think it's a really good idea for you to be, for us to be really informed on what the restrictions and on the flip side, liberalizations are going to be with respect to licensing requirements. Because, for example, in Suffolk County, I know that the county executive has used his emergency power to order the health department to issue as of right permits for outdoor seating in restaurants. I mean, this is the crisis facing the restaurant industry is universal. So the state's Albany's got to be dealing with this on virtually every level possible.
Certainly.
I just, let's face it, our business district is weak under the best of circumstances. This could be an existential threat to a lot of our merchants.
Yeah, that's why I would think we need to think about it and find out what we can and can't do under the various, because we're in this weird spot between city licensing, community board 8, state licensing. What are we allowed to do? What are we not allowed to do? So we give the vendors options.
I'm happy to look into that for you.
Thank you.
Yeah, do that. And also, what's his name? David Kramer. He's got some legal resources we may not have. And
The other thing,
he's got some muscle he can apply.
Sorry about that.
If we encourage him.
The other thing is that the governor, an interesting question arises: who has the authority to issue an emergency decree as it relates to to Roosevelt Island? Is it the governor or is it the mayor? If it's the governor, then he might be able to use his emergency powers to get around some of the bureaucratic obstacles that might otherwise exist.
How about the RIOC board of directors?
I don't know. That's a question for Gretchen. Probably not.
But the real question for us is that once you've crossed the river, we're the state of New York, aside from the hospitals. So that gives, as to Dave's point, we're the board of directors, so we have a lot of decisions to make. The only other complication that we ever run into is that Community Board 8 thinks that they have authority over liquor licensing in this here, which is the state of New York, not the city of New York. So I'm not exactly sure where that comes from, but traditionally they've issued liquor licenses for this area.
Let's put a stop to that. We're the board. It's our rock. We have legal responsibility for this fucking rock.
And they make the recommendations to the liquor license board. They make the recommendations to the liquor license board.
I'm sorry, Jeffrey, I can't hear you.
They make the recommendations to the state liquor license board. We don't issue with respect to SLC decisions. They just write the recommendations to whether or not there should be any sort of action taken on the SLC license. So to that extent,
these are extreme times,
right?
And we have extreme problems, particularly to our restaurants and food service facilities here, and to food service all across the city. And if there's a chance for us to make more food service institutions available to our community, I think we should be willing to take a chance. We're not going to jail just because we authorize people to serve liquor on the street.
Yeah.
Well, Michael will be going to jail. But
I would just like to mention that Jackie Flug, our former general counsel, also worked for the State Liquor Authority. So I can also contact her. I'm still in contact with her to see if she is aware of any new rules or regulations, because she does now is also related to liquor sales.
Tell her I love her and she should do it for me.
Absolutely.
The other thing we might want to look at for the summer is we had food trucks in the past that was serving food at the various places around the island that people seem to like. I don't know if how that's going to play out in the current environment, but it's been good. We had a beer garden once on the promenade. We had a bunch of other food trucks. I'm going to go on to the next